Welcome back. Well, as we said, Michael Caine will be here in a few minutes. But right now, the subject is Serbia. For Serbia, elections seem to be becoming a sort of national pastime. In less than a fortnight, the country will be going to the polls for the third time in less than 2 years, and just 3 months after Kosovo declared its independence. Europe is a key factor in this parliamentary election, and earlier this week, Serbia signed a pre-membership deal with the European Union, the first step towards full EU membership. But for many, we'll see the proportions in the election, but for many, the opposition in particular, still look to Russia rather than to Europe. That's the divide. To discuss the upcoming elections, Kosovo, and Serbia's future direction, I was joined earlier by Serbia's Foreign Minister, Vuk Jeremic. Vuk, last time we talked, you were saying that the elections on May the 11th were going to be a real watershed for Serbia, basically. Is that even more true now?
I think it's becoming increasingly obvious that these elections are effectively going to be a referendum on Serbia joining the European Union. All the countries of Central and Eastern Europe joined, and after having their referendum in the end of a long accession process. Such are the circumstances in Serbia that we are effectively having our referendum on May 11. And if it is successful, then the technical process of acceding to the European Union in the next 4 or 5 years is going to follow. But we've got two options. One is strongly pro-European, the other is strongly anti-European, and that is the most divisive, actually the only divisive issue in these elections. And
you mean that there'll be no chance of Serbia wanting to join the EU if the ultra-nationalists win?
Well, the ultra-nationalists, the isolationist bloc, if you will, are very transparently offering the vision of Serbia that is not a member of EU, that has cut its political ties with the European Union and stepped out from the process of the EU accession. And it's a fair and democratic election. People are going to vote, and if there is a democratic decision of the Serbian people, which I hope is not going to happen, and we're campaigning very, very hard so that it doesn't happen, then Serbia is going to end up being isolated for another generation. But I'm an optimist, and I think that we will win, that the referendum is going to be won, and that Serbia is going to continue its accelerated path towards full EU membership.
Because you had those presidential elections back in February, didn't you? And that was before Kosovo seceded, or whatever the word is. And now they have. Does that mean the mood is different to February or the same?
Well, on February 17, we had a presidential election just a few days before there was an attempt at secession by the Kosovo provisional institutions, which destabilized the situation in the whole of the region. So I think that there's a lot more confusion, there's a lot more instability, there's a lot more insecurity throughout the region of the Balkans, not just in Serbia. And of course, when you have such set of circumstances, it's become increasingly difficult to campaign on a positive, on a visionary platform like future of Serbia as a full member of the European Union. But this is something that we're doing, and this is something that I think is going to get us a victory in the end.
And you've got a controversy also at the same time about the decision to have local elections in the Serbian conclaves or enclaves in Kosovo, and that people have called this divisive and provocative, the US said, and so on. Do you think that does increase ethnic tensions?
Well, what I think it's really important is that we, under these very, very difficult circumstances after the unilateral declaration of independence, which we deem illegal and which we're not recognizing, that we find a way of, come what may, try and engage with each other in making sure that there is peace and stability, that there's no shooting, that nobody gets hurt, that the economy gets going despite the fact that we are having this profound disagreement. The best way to do it is to basically elect the representatives of the people with whom you can then engage. So I think it's very important that we carry out the democratic process, that we carry out democratic processes at all levels, including the local levels, so that we simply know which people are going to be in charge. Elected by the people and engaging with the other side.
Isn't that in danger of being partition?
Well, we're certainly not advocating any kind of partition, any kind of division, ethnic, geographical, you name it. We are saying we're going to organize these elections because they're due according to our constitution. We're respecting our constitution. For us, Kosovo is still part of Serbia. It will be part of Serbia as far as we're concerned, I'm sure.
Now, Netherlands sounded some notes that were quite friendly towards Serbia, but they added that nothing should be done until those 4 war criminals were delivered by you to The Hague, as it were. How is it that they haven't been?
Well, Serbia is working very, very hard. We have been working very hard ever since we installed democracy to reach this level of full cooperation with the Hague Tribunal. And so far, successive governments of Serbia have extradited 42 high-level individuals to the Hague Tribunal. I'm talking about several presidents of the Republic. I'm talking about several prime ministers, several chiefs, former chiefs of general staff.
It's just amazing that Mladic, particularly, and Karadzic, who are both sort of bogey figures around the world, two such famous fugitives from justice, have somehow managed to stay free. I mean, it's like,
you know what,
like a new edition of Colditz or something.
I think that they're not probably the most famous fugitives in the world. There are some people who are being actively sought by countries and by you know, services throughout the world. There are people in the Middle East who are probably more famous than Karadzic and Mladic, and sometimes it's not very easy to find a wartime commander in the mountainous area where he's been fighting this war. Serbia is trying very hard, and if the elections are won by the pro-European forces, then there is absolutely no doubt that our policy is going to remain firm on this one. That we want to make sure that the guilt for the criminal acts committed in our name in the 1990s is individualized, so that the people are in The Hague, that they have their chance to defend themselves in the International Court of Law.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, David. Thanks.
Pleasure to have you with us.
My pleasure.
From one trouble spot to another, from Serbia now to Zimbabwe. It's now over a month since Zimbabwe's parliamentary and presidential elections. After recounts in 23 seats and delay after delay, the Electoral Commission finally confirmed this week that the opposition MDC won a majority in Parliament. Meanwhile, senior figures in ZANU-PF conceded for the first time that Robert Mugabe had lost the presidential vote. But they said that the opposition leader, Morgan Tsvangirai, had failed to secure an outright win and that a second round is now necessary. So what next for Zimbabwe? Once again, I'm delighted to be joined by Knox Chitiyo from the Royal United Sevices Institute think tank. It's all up to the MDC now, what they do, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very much, the ball is very much in the MDC's court now. And here we're talking in terms of the hard realities of power politics. The MDC essentially has got two choices. One is that they can say, look, we won the parliamentary and presidential election. According to our figures, we don't need a runoff, we've won it outright. Or they can say, okay, we did not win outright and we go for a runoff. Both cases actually are problematic, because if the MDC refuses to go for a runoff, Mugabe will continue anyway. If they go for a runoff, then there have to be, I think, some measures taken to make sure that it's not a violent rerun. I think this is the big fear that everyone has.
Yes, because they said at one stage, Morgan said at one stage, didn't he, that they would not participate in a runoff. But now there's a situation where apparently the Electoral Committee stroke ZANU-PF are admitting that he won 47-43, and they claim, MBC claims that, on the other hand, that it's 50.3, which is very close. So that they are handing the election to Mugabe if they don't do a runoff, aren't they?
Basically, yes, because the other thing we should remember, all the figures are suspect. Whether we're talking the MDC, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, ZANU-PF, there's no really single set of credible figures in this whole morass. So in terms of where to move forward, I think it's now for the MDC to decide, because the other problem for them is that they've not quite managed to get the kind of regional and African Union support that they really, really wanted. They've had some recognition, but they haven't had the kind of support that they really wanted, which could leverage ZANU-PF to award outright victory to the MDC.
And we have a quote here from the UN Under-Secretary for Political Affairs, Lynn Pascoe, saying that Zimbabwe was in the midst of its worst humanitarian crisis since independence, and talking about political intimidation and violence. I mean, that's the crunch question, isn't it?
Yes.
That on the one hand, it's obviously a weak act for a principled opposition leader not to run because he's worried about a bit of violence. That's weak. But on the other hand, it's very difficult to provoke a lot of violence. Well, he wouldn't be guilty for the violence, however. I mean, Mugabe would be guilty for the violence.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the state controls the armory, although there are reports that the MDC Youth League actually has been mounting a kind of militant campaign as well. So, you know, there's violence now on both sides, although it's mainly the state. But the real issue, I think, is that the MDC may actually have a limited amount of leverage in terms of a runoff, because they can insist that it be carried under internationally credible monitoring system to avoid it becoming a completely violent election which will continue to be non-credible and so on. I think there have to be some safeguards in place to make sure that it is a credible runoff as well.
And that would be a pattern that everybody could go along with, wouldn't it? So that's, do you think that will be the thing that happens?
It's impossible to say what would happen, but I think in terms of the harsh realities, I think this probably is what the MDC would need to go on. Because if they refuse to go for a runoff, then I think that's it for Tsvangirai. Mugabe will continue regardless, and Tsvangirai, bit by bit, will sink back into obscurity. I think it's very hard for the MDC to avoid a runoff, but it needs to be done in a non-violent manner, and there needs to be safeguards.
Well, we'll keep watching, won't we? Keep watching what's going on there. And now, one of the world's best-loved actors, double Oscar winner, popular as all get out, Michael Caine, will be with me after the news headlines.